For the first time in 7 years of marriage, Chloe Hayes didn't come home. The next day, when her old flame, Miles Vance, showed up at our door to thank her, I learned she'd spent the night picking him up from the airport. Over the next 3 months, Miles would always casually let things slip. Chloe said she only married you out of necessity. She said just looking at you makes her feel suffocated. She said the one she's always truly loved is me. I silently pressed the record button on my phone each time. The moment I finally put the divorce papers on the table, I threw the phone down in front of her, the recordings playing. Chloe's eyes instantly turned red. He's full of shit. She grabbed me and stormed over to Miles's apartment, kicking his knee with a 4-inch stiletto. Try to drive a wedge between us one more time. Amid the sickening thud of heel hitting flesh, her roar was louder than any recording. My husband is 1,000 times better than you. When the clock on the wall crept past midnight, its hour hand stubbornly inching toward 1. The living room was dark, save for a single floor lamp by the sofa. Its dim, yellow glow barely managed to tear a hole in the darkness, stretching Ethan Hayes' shadow long across the floor like a silent, exhausted ghost. The ashtray was already overflowing with a small mountain of cigarette butts. Ethan pulled out another. The crisp click of the metal lighter was jarring in the dead still night. An orange flame licked the tip of the cigarette. He took a deep drag, the acrid smoke rolling down his throat, but it did nothing to quell the anxiety burning in his chest. Chloe's phone still went straight to voicemail. The cold, robotic voice repeating, "The number you have dialed is currently unavailable," was like a dull knife, sawing at his nerves with each repetition. In his messaging app, the last text he'd sent, "When are you coming home?" hung unanswered at the top of the screen. Below it, only empty space. 7 years. In 7 years of marriage, Chloe had never done this. She was a person who valued courtesy. If she was working late or out with friends, no matter how late, she would always send a text or call to let him know. This, disappearing all night without a word, completely unreachable, was a first. Ethan raked a hand through his hair in frustration, leaning his head back against the cool leather of the sofa. His mind spun with a chaotic reel of possibilities. A car accident? A dead phone? Or was she in some kind of trouble? He shook his head, trying to force the ominous thoughts away, but another, sharper thought pushed its way to the surface, lodging in his chest like a shard of ice. What if she was with someone else? The idea was a poisonous thorn, making it impossible for him to sit still. He stubbed out the cigarette and picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the names of Chloe's closest friends and his contacts, hesitating. In the end, he tossed the phone back onto the coffee table with a sigh of defeat. The clatter of it hitting the glass surface sounded deafeningly loud in the silence. No, it was the middle of the night. Waking them up would just make him look like a paranoid, pathetic husband. He stood and walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the night was a heavy, inky black. The glittering city lights of Seattle blurred into a distant, hazy ribbon of light, unable to penetrate the cold emptiness of the living room. The glass faintly reflected his own image, a man with a deeply furrowed brow and dark, troubled eyes. Time crawled by, each second of the agonizing wait stretching into an eternity. Ethan just stood there, watching the darkness outside slowly dilute, watching the sky turn from gray to a pale, fish-belly white, until finally, the weak morning light seeped reluctantly into the room. Daybreak. At last, the faint sound of a key turning in the lock came from the entryway. Ethan shot up from the sofa, crossing the room in a few quick strides. The door opened. Chloe stood there, still wearing the same cream-colored business suit she'd left in yesterday, now noticeably wrinkled. Her face was etched with fatigue, dark circles smudged beneath her eyes. Her hair, usually immaculate, had a few stray strands stuck to her damp forehead. In her hand, she pulled a small carry-on suitcase. She looked like she'd been through a long journey. Seeing Ethan standing stiffly in front of her, Chloe froze for a second, then forced a strained smile. "Ethan, you're up early? Or did you not sleep?" Her voice was hoarse from lack of rest. Ethan didn't answer. His gaze was heavy, first on her face, then dropping to the suitcase by her feet. His voice was as dry as sandpaper. "Where were you last night? Your phone was off, and you didn't answer my texts." The smile on Chloe's face faltered. Her eyes flickered away, avoiding his direct gaze. She bent down to change her shoes, her movements deliberately slow. "Oh, last night, something urgent came up. My phone. It died. By the time I was done, it was too late. I didn't want to wake you, so I just found a hotel near the office for the night." She straightened up, trying to sound casual. "See? I came straight back first thing in the morning." "Something urgent?" Ethan repeated, his tone unreadable. What kind of urgent matter keeps you out all night and doesn't give you a single moment to charge your phone? Chloe's hand tightened on the suitcase handle, her knuckles turning white. She looked up, meeting his scrutinizing gaze, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. It was a sudden work crisis. It was a mess, and it took all night to sort out. Ethan, I'm exhausted. Can I please just go take a shower and rest? We could talk about the details later, okay? She tried to sidle past him. Ethan didn't move. His tall frame blocked the doorway like a silent, immovable wall. He saw the undisguised exhaustion in her eyes and the flicker of panic she tried to hide. His heart sank. 7 years of living together, of knowing her every nuance. His intuition screamed that she was lying. That sudden work crisis sounded hollow and dismissive. A suffocating silence filled the space between them, broken only by Chloe's slightly ragged breathing and the last lingering, burnt smell from the cigarette he had long since extinguished. Finally, Ethan stepped aside. He didn't press further, just gave her one last, deep look, a look so complex it made Chloe's heart clench. Go take a shower. His voice was calm again, almost unnaturally so. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. As if granted a pardon, Chloe practically fled towards the bedroom, pulling the suitcase behind her and shutting the door. Soon, the sound of running water came from the bathroom. Ethan stood frozen in place, listening to the shower, his gaze fixed on the entryway floor. There next to the heels Chloe had kicked off was a tiny, almost invisible fleck of mud. He crouched down, rubbing it between his fingers. It was fresh. Would a high-end hotel near her downtown office have mud like that at its entrance? He stood up and walked back to the living room window, looking out at the fully illuminated sky. The sunlight was glaring, but it couldn't reach the sudden, dark storm clouds gathering in his heart. That thought, the one about someone else, coiled around him like a suffocating vine, squeezing the air from his lungs. The foundation of 7 years of trust had, in the space of a single night, developed a tiny but fatal crack. And Ethan knew that once suspicion takes root, some things can never go back. He needed an answer, a real one. He pulled out his phone, the screen's light illuminating his grim profile. He opened a secure folder. It was empty. He created a new audio file, giving it a simple name, today's date. Then, he pressed the red record button. The screen showed the recording was in progress. The faint red icon glowed like a silent, watchful eye. The sound of the shower stopped. After a long moment, the bedroom door opened. Chloe had changed into comfortable loungewear, her wet hair wrapped in a towel. The steam from the shower had brought a flush to her clean face, but the exhaustion in her eyes remained. She walked into the living room and saw Ethan still standing by the window, his back rigid. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft, deliberately placating. "Last night was really an exception. I'm sorry I worried you. I promise it won't happen again." She moved closer, reaching for his hand. Before she could touch him, Ethan turned away, a subtle but clear rejection. His gaze was calm as it landed on her face. You must be hungry. I'll make us something to eat." His tone was as flat as if he were discussing the weather. Chloe's hand froze in midair, the smile on her face fading. She watched his back as he walked into the kitchen, opened her mouth to say something, but ultimately said nothing. Dejected, she sank onto the sofa and started scrolling aimlessly on her phone, her mind clearly elsewhere. The quiet clatter of pots and pans came from the kitchen. Ethan fried 2 eggs and heated up some milk, his movements mechanical. The weight of last night's suspicion was a heavy stone in his chest, making Chloe's attempt at reconciliation feel grating. He brought the simple breakfast out and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "Thanks," Chloe murmured, sipping her milk. The atmosphere was so heavy it was hard to breathe. Just then, the doorbell rang, its cheerful ding-dong shattering the tense air. Chloe and Ethan both looked towards the door, surprised. Who would be here at this hour? Ethan walked over and looked through the peephole. A man stood outside, tall and well-built, dressed in a tailored light gray blazer. His hair was perfectly styled, and he held a beautifully wrapped fruit basket. A pleasant, polite smile was fixed on his face, giving him an air of cultured charm. Ethan's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. He recognized that face. Miles Vance, Chloe's senior from college. And, in the eyes of many, including in Ethan's own occasional moments of doubt, the indelible one that got away. What was he doing here? Suppressing the unease in his gut, Ethan opened the door. "Mr. Hayes, good morning. Sorry to bother you," Miles said with a perfectly calibrated smile, his voice warm. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." His gaze slid past Ethan's shoulder, landing precisely on Chloe, who was sitting on the sofa. His smile deepened. "Chloe." The moment she saw Miles, Chloe was visibly stunned. A flicker of shock crossed her face before she stood up and walked over, looking flustered. Miles? What? What are you doing here? I owe you a huge thanks for yesterday, Miles said, offering the fruit basket to Ethan, who took it with a blank expression. My flight was ridiculously delayed. I didn't land until after midnight. I didn't know the area, and my phone was acting up, so I couldn't even get a rideshare. If you hadn't gotten my message and rushed over to help me get settled, I really would have spent the night at the airport. He turned to Chloe, his voice full of sincere gratitude. Chloe, thank you so much. I won't forget this. Boom. Miles's words exploded in Ethan's ears like a bomb. He felt the blood rush to his head, only to freeze into ice a second later. Last night, not coming home, the so-called work crisis, the dead phone, all the scattered pieces were instantly slammed together by Miles's casual words of thanks, forming a picture that was crystal clear and agonizingly sharp. So, her entire night of disappearance was spent picking him up for her brilliant, newly returned old flame. Ethan's fingers tightened around the fruit basket, the hard wicker digging painfully into his palm. The muscles in his face were clenched so tightly it was a miracle he didn't lose control right then and there. He slowly turned his head, his gaze like a shard of ice as he stared at Chloe. Chloe's face had gone deathly pale the moment Miles mentioned got my message, rushed over, and helped me get settled. She looked at Ethan in a panic, her lips parting as if to explain. Ethan. Oh. Ethan cut her off, his voice devoid of any warmth. He looked at Miles and even managed a stiff, horrifying smile. Is that so? You're too kind, Mr. Vance. It was nothing. My wife. She's always been so helpful. The last few words were spoken with a chilling slowness. Miles either didn't notice the temperature in the room plummeting or chose to ignore it. He maintained his gentle smile, his eyes glancing between Chloe and Ethan. It seems I've come at a bad time. Did I interrupt something? Chloe, you must be exhausted after being up so late. Mr. Hayes, my apologies for tiring out your wife. Not at all, Ethan said, his voice hard as stone. He stepped aside. Won't you come in, Mr. Vance? Oh no, I can't, Miles said, waving his hands. I just came by to say thank you. Now that I've dropped this off, my work is done. I got a mountain of things to deal with at the office, just getting back into the swing of things. Another time, I'll treat you both to dinner to thank you properly. He looked at Chloe again, his expression gentle. Get some rest, Chloe. Don't overdo it. Thanks again for everything last night. You're too polite. It was nothing, Chloe said, her voice weak, her eyes darting away, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. Well, I'll be on my way, Miles said with a polite nod, then turned and left. The door clicked shut, cutting off the light from the hallway and shattering the last pretense of calm. Only Ethan and Chloe remained in the living room. The air was so thick with tension it felt solid. The fruit basket was tossed onto a nearby console table with a heavy thud. Chloe looked at Ethan's face, which was so dark it looked like it was about to storm. She took a step forward, desperately trying to grab his arm. Ethan, let me explain. It's not what you think. Yesterday was just not what I think. Ethan violently shook her hand off, the force making her stumble. He closed the distance between them, his towering frame casting an oppressive shadow. His eyes burned with repressed fury and pain. Then what is it, Chloe? Tell me. You stay out all night, phone off, ignore my messages. I ask you where you were, and you tell me it was work. Then your phone died. And the truth. He pointed at the door, his voice rising, cracking with a raw agony. The truth is you went to pick him up, to get him settled, for your precious Miles Vance. What do you take me for? An idiot? I didn't. Chloe cried out, her eyes instantly welling with tears. His message was a complete surprise. He said his phone was about to die. He just landed, couldn't get a car, and he was stranded. He helped me out a lot in the past. I couldn't just leave him there. And I was afraid you'd overthink it. That's why afraid I'd overthink it. Ethan laughed, a bitter, broken sound. His eyes were filled with disappointment and scorn. So you chose to lie to me? You used work as an excuse? Chloe, we've been married for 7 years. 7. In your mind, am I that untrustworthy? That petty? That I wouldn't let you help an old classmate? An old friend? He took a deep, shuddering breath, his chest heaving as he tried to contain the rage and heartbreak tearing him apart. He looked at Chloe's tear-streaked face and her wounded expression and felt nothing but an all-consuming exhaustion. Forget it, he said, waving a hand dismissively. His voice dropped low, thick with fatigue. I don't want to hear your explanations. I am tired. He turned his back on her and walked towards his study, his posture rigid and cold. Ethan, Chloe called after him, her voice choked with tears. He didn't pause. The study door slammed shut behind him with a resounding bang, closing him off with his own chaotic heart. Outside the door, Chloe sagged against the cold wall, tears finally streaming down her face. She stared at the closed door, her heart filled with a mix of anguish and a nameless dread. She was just helping someone out of sense of obligation. How did it all turn into this? Inside, Ethan slid down the back of the door until he was sitting on the cold floor. The study was dark. He pulled out his phone, its faint glow illuminating his bloodshot eyes and tightly pressed lips. On the screen, the red icon of the new audio file was still blinking silently. He stared at it, his expression growing colder, deeper. Miles Vance's gentle, grateful face twisted in his mind, becoming a grotesque, carefully constructed mask. The foundation of trust had crumbled, and Miles's appearance was a poisoned dagger, plunged precisely into the crack. Ethan's fingers unconsciously stroked the cool metal of his phone. He needed to know more. He needed to know if this old flame's sudden return, this simple favor of a late-night airport pickup, was just a coincidence or the beginning of something else. He needed to know how much sincerity Chloe had left for him for their home. In the dark study, the red light of the recording button glowed like a tireless eye, ever watchful for secrets. On the surface, life seemed to return to normal, but a thick, cold sheet of frosted glass now stood between Ethan and Chloe. Their conversations became sparse and polite, the air thick with a cautious awkwardness and a suspicion that refused to dissipate. Chloe tried to explain, to get close, but the wall of anger and hurt from that night's deception repelled all her efforts. Ethan grew silent, distant, often shutting himself in the study until late at night. And Miles Vance, like a venomous snake, began to slither into their lives, appearing frequently and always with an air of casual coincidence. The first time was at the coffee shop downstairs from Ethan's office. Ethan had just left a grueling meeting, his head pounding, and wanted coffee. As he pushed open the door, he saw Miles sitting by the window, leisurely flipping through a financial magazine. Ethan? What a coincidence! Miles looked up, his face breaking into a surprised, welcoming smile. He waved him over. Come, join me. My treat. Ethan wanted to refuse, but Miles was already on his feet, insistently guiding him to the table and flagging down a barista. An Americano for my friend here, same as mine. Put on my tab. You don't have to do that, Ethan said coolly, sitting across from him. The coffee arrived quickly. Miles stirred his, sighing with a touch of melancholy. Man, it's tough getting readjusted after being away so long. Not like Chloe, she's always been so brilliant, so adaptable. He paused, as if a thought just occurred to him, and looked at Ethan with a calculated mix of sympathy and superiority. Speaking of which, Ethan, Chloe can be a bit blunt sometimes. She doesn't always watch what she says. Don't take it to heart, okay? Ethan's hand, holding his coffee cup, stilled. He looked up. What's that supposed to mean, Miles? Miles waved his hand dismissively, his smile tinged with helplessness. Oh, nothing, just chatting. You know, Chloe and I go way back, so I know her pretty well. She's fiercely loyal and sentimental, but sometimes, well, she just says what's on her mind without thinking about how it sounds. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Like the other day, a few of us old college friends got together. Chloe might have had a little too much to drink, got a bit emotional. Anyway, she didn't say much, just got to talking about the past. She said that when she got married, it was partly due to, pressure. A bit of shame, really. Of course, she wasn't talking about you specifically, just musing. Don't overthink it. Pressure? A shame. Ethan repeated the words, his voice flat, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the cup. Under the table, his other hand had slipped into his pocket, his thumb finding the shortcut button on the side of his phone. Recording started. Miles, seemingly oblivious to the subtle shift in Ethan's demeanor, continued his act of a concerned friend. Yeah, it was just something she said. You know how women can be. They get emotional and say things they don't entirely mean. Or maybe the things they really mean. Please don't be offended. I'm sure Chloe cares for you. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been with you all these years, right? It's just, maybe after all this time, the daily grind has worn away some of the passion. She mentioned to me once that being with you now sometimes feels a little suffocating, like she can't breathe. Look, that's just marriage, right? Full of compromises. Suffocating. A cold smile touched Ethan's lips, his eyes sharp as daggers. You seem to have a pretty good handle on my wife's inner feelings, Miles. Miles flinched internally at his sharp gaze, but kept his smile fixed. Don't get me wrong. I overheard her mention it once or twice. And, as a friend, I thought I should give you a heads up. Encourage you to pay more attention to her feelings. Communication is key in a marriage. After all, he took a sip of his coffee, hiding his momentary unease. Ethan said nothing more, just sipped his bitter coffee. The liquid did nothing to quell the icy rage building inside him. Every word from Miles was a poison-tipped needle, aimed at his most vulnerable spots. A marriage of necessity, a relationship that was suffocating. Coming from Miles, these words were a nauseating mix of insinuation and provocation. In his pocket, his phone silently recorded the entire malicious conversation disguised as a chance encounter. This was only the beginning. A few days later, Ethan was leaving a meeting at a partner's office when he ran into Miles again, who was conveniently exiting the building next door. "Ethan, we got to stop meeting like this." Miles greeted him with a familiar laugh, clapping him on the shoulder. "Business?" "Yeah," Ethan replied curtly, not breaking his stride. But Miles stuck to him like glue, falling into step beside him. "How's Chloe been? She seemed a little down after our get-together the other day. Are you too having problems?" He glanced at Ethan, his eyes probing, a flicker of triumph in them. Ethan ignored him. Miles didn't mind, sighing theatrically. Back in college, Chloe was so full of life, like a little ray of sunshine. So many guys were after her, and she had high standards. But she told me once that the person she was truly in love with never really changed. He paused for effect, giving Ethan a meaningful look. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "She said the one she truly, deeply loved. There was only one. It's a shame how things work out. Don't you think life is ironic, Ethan? Sometimes the person lying next to you in bed has someone else in their heart." Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. He whipped his head around, his gaze like an ice pick, pinning Miles's faux sympathetic face. His voice was cold enough to freeze water. "What exactly are you trying to say, Miles?" Startled by the raw hostility in his eyes, Miles took a step back before composing himself with a nervous smile. "Hey, no need to get worked up. I was just feeling a bit sorry for Chloe. She's a wonderful person who deserves the purest kind of love. It's a shame." "Oh, well." He shook his head as if he'd said too much. "Forget it. I should go. Talk to you later, Ethan." He turned and walked away quickly, as if fleeing the scene. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk. The afternoon sun was warm on his skin, but a chilling cold was spreading from his feet to the crown of his head. Miles's last words, especially the one she truly, deeply loved, there was only one, echoed in his mind like a curse. His hand in his pocket was clenched around his phone, his knuckles white. The red light of the recording icon glowed silently in the dark. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Miles always found an excuse for these chance encounters, always speaking in the most harmless tone while delivering the most soul-crushing words. And every time, Ethan listened in silence, a dormant volcano of rage building within him. His phone became his only weapon, faithfully collecting every drop of poison Miles spewed. "Chloe said just looking at you makes her feel suffocated. She said the one she's always truly loved is me. She said marrying you was the biggest regret of her life." The words were recorded, played back, seared into his mind like a branding iron. With each recording, the crack in his trust grew wider, deeper, until it was a chasm. The last vestiges of warmth and hope he held for Chloe withered under Miles's relentless assault, turning to cold, dead ash. The study became his fortress and his prison. He listened to the recordings on a loop until Chloe's voice, filtered through Miles's narration, became that of a stranger, full of resentment and deceit. He looked at a photo of her on his computer screen, at the smile that once brought him warmth and now saw only mockery. Enough. It was enough. 3 months of agony, of suspicion, of the snake's whispers. It had drained him of all patience, all love. He didn't want to hear any more explanations. He didn't want to see Chloe's face, feigning innocence or hurt. This marriage, this house built on lies and betrayal, filled him with disgust. He needed it to end. Now, Ethan closed the audio player, and the dark screen reflected his emotionless face. He pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay a single document. He took it out, the white paper glaring under the desk lamp. On the cover, in bold letters, divorce agreement. He picked up a pen and paused over the signature line for party. The nib hovered, trembling slightly. Finally, his eyes hardened. With a decisive flick of his wrist, he signed his name, Ethan Hayes. The script was sharp, cutting, filled with the finality of severing all ties. He picked up the agreement and the phone that held all the evidence and walked out of the study. In the living room, Chloe was on the sofa, distractedly flipping through channels. Ethan walked up to her, blocking the light from the TV. Chloe looked up. Seeing the papers in his hand and the icy expression on his face, her heart dropped. A powerful sense of dread seized her. "Ethan, what is that?" Her voice was tight. Ethan didn't speak. He simply placed the divorce agreement on the coffee table in front of her, gently, but with the weight of 1,000 pounds. The paper slapped against the glass with a quiet thwack, like the sound of something shattering. Chloe's gaze fell upon the words divorce agreement. Her pupils contracted, and all the color drained from her face. For the two words, divorce agreement, printed in bold, were like 5 red-hot needles stabbing into Chloe's eyes. The room swam before her. She shot her head up, staring at Ethan in utter disbelief, her voice trembling. "Ethan? What? What is this?" Ethan looked down at her, his face a mask of cold indifference. Instead of answering, he pulled out the phone he had been carrying for 3 months. He unlocked it, swiped through a few screens, and opened a secure folder filled with a dozen audio files, each labeled with a date. He selected the most recent one, his thumb hovering over the play button as his heavy gaze fell on Chloe's pale face. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "What is this? Listen, and you'll understand." He pressed play. Miles Vance's familiar, pleasant, and now utterly venomous voice filled the quiet living room. Chloe said just looking at you makes her feel suffocated. She said the one she's always truly loved is me. She said marrying you is the biggest regret of her life. Miles's voice, laced with false sympathy and calculated pity, drilled into Chloe's ears. Every word was a sledgehammer blow to her heart. The blood drained from her face, and she began to tremble uncontrollably. It felt as if she'd been struck by lightning, her mind reeling from the sheer shock and absurdity of it all. She leaped up from the sofa, so abruptly that she nearly fainted. "No, that's not true. Ethan," she shrieked, her voice sharp with shock and rage, tears instantly flooding her eyes. "He's lying. He's full of shit. I never said any of those things. Never." She lunged for the phone, tried to silence the nauseating voice. But Ethan stepped back, easily evading her, his eyes cold with disgust, as if he were looking at a pathetic liar. "Never." Ethan's voice erupted, the fury, humiliation, and pain of the last 3 months exploding like a volcano. He pointed a trembling finger at the phone. "Miles Vance," he said himself. Once, twice, 3 times. Every single coincidence, he was there, telling me how you belittle me, how you regret marrying me, how you still love him. "Chloe, tell me, why would he say these things? What given a right? If you didn't tell him, how would he know?" He was like a cornered, wounded animal, his eyes bloodshot, his chest heaving. Watching me get played for a fool. Watching me listen to these recordings over and over. Watching me suffer. Watching me doubt you. Did that make you feel powerful, Chloe? 7 years. What the hell am I to you? A choice of last resort? A burden that suffocates you? Or just a complete and utter joke? No, it's not like that. Ethan, please believe me. Chloe sobbed, shaking her head violently. She wanted to go to him, but the raw hatred in his eyes kept her at bay. "It's Miles. He's trying to drive us apart. He's lying. He's setting me up. I never said any of that to him. Not a single word. I swear. Ethan, please just believe me this one time." "Believe you?" Ethan let out a short, sharp, agonizing laugh. His eyes were filled with absolute despair. "How can I believe you? Tell me, Chloe. When you stayed out all night to pick him up, you lied and said it was work. You met with him behind my back, complained to him, told him how much you regretted marrying me, how you still loved him. Now the proof is right here, and you're telling me he's lying? That he set you up? Do you think I'm a complete moron, Chloe? Someone you can screw over again and again?" He pointed at the divorce agreement on the table, his voice hoarse with pain and fury. "Sign it. Chloe, sign it right now. I can't live like this for one more day. I feel sick just looking at you. I won't sign it." Chloe screamed, breaking down completely. The undisguised disgust in his eyes terrified her. A wave of panic and injustice washed over her. She wiped her tears away, and her red-rimmed eyes suddenly blazed with a ferocious anger. Not at Ethan, but at the snake who had been poisoning them from the shadows. "Fine. You don't believe me, right?" Chloe's voice rose, filled with a desperate, wild resolve. "I'll prove it to you. Right now. Miles Vance, that bastard. I'm going to make him pay." Like an enraged lioness, she spun around, not towards the door, but towards a shoe rack in the entryway. She yanked it open and, without looking, grabbed a pair of black patent leather heels she rarely wore, their stilettos a deadly 4-inch spike. Barefoot, she clutched the shoes in one hand like a weapon and seized Ethan's wrist with the other. Her grip was so tight her nails dug into his flesh. "You're coming with me." Chloe's voice was a raw, furious hiss. Her blazing eyes locked onto his. "Right now, we're going to find Miles. I want you to hear with your own ears who's full of shit. I want you to see with your own eyes what kind of monster that backstabbing son of a bitch really is. She gave him no time to react. Using every ounce of her strength, she dragged the stunned and still furious Ethan towards the door. She threw it open, and the harsh daylight flooded in, illuminating her tear-streaked but murderous face. "Let's go," she roared, dragging him out into the hall, barefoot and unstoppable. As the elevator doors closed, Ethan saw it in her eyes, a world-destroying fury and the terrifying glint of a woman with nothing left to lose. In his pocket, the phone's recording icon had, at some point, gone dark. A storm far more violent was being dragged, kicking and screaming, straight to its source. The feeling of the elevator dropping made Ethan's head spin. Chloe's grip on his wrist was painfully tight, but he barely felt it. All his senses were consumed by the furious, almost tangible rage radiating from her. She was barefoot, her hair a mess, tear tracks still wet on her face, but her eyes were blood-red, burning with a destructive light he had never seen before. She clutched the stiletto heel like a dagger, its sharp point glinting under the elevator lights. "Chloe, calm down." Ethan tried to pull his hand back, a flicker of alarm in his voice. He had no doubt that in her current state, Chloe was capable of murder. "Calm down." She whipped her head around, her red eyes boring into him, her voice a chilling, hoarse laugh. "He smeared my name and tried to destroy my marriage. You want me to calm down? Ethan, I swear to God, if I don't rip that filthy mouth off his face today, you can call me by another name." The elevator dinged, arriving at the ground floor. Before the doors were fully open, Chloe burst out like a caged animal, dragging Ethan with her. A few residents in the lobby stared at the wild-looking pair, the barefoot woman brandishing a high heel, the man stumbling behind her, their faces a mixture of shock and alarm. Chloe ignored them. She ran to the curb, yanked open the door of a taxi that had just dropped someone off, and shoved Ethan inside, scrambling in after him before slamming the door. The Cascade Grand. "Now," she barked the name of Miles's apartment building, her voice sharp and commanding. The driver, startled by her ferocity, glanced in the rearview mirror, took in the stiletto and her crazed eyes, and wisely chose not to ask questions. He stomped on the gas, and the car shot forward. The silence inside the cab was suffocating. Chloe's chest heaved, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the shoe, her nails digging into her own palm. Ethan sat beside her, watching the hard line of her jaw and the terrifying rage in her eyes. His own anger and suspicion were still there, but they were now overshadowed by the sheer shock of the moment, and by a flicker of doubt he was reluctant to admit. Could this really be an act? This willingness to burn everything to the ground? The car sped through the city in silence, soon pulling up to the impressive entrance of the Cascade Grand. Chloe threw a bill at the driver without waiting for change, flung open the door, and ran, still barefoot, still clutching her weapon. "Chloe!" Ethan yelled, jumping out of the car after her. She didn't seem to hear him. She had a target. She stormed straight into the building's lobby. The security was tight, requiring a key fob or resident approval. Chloe marched up to the front desk, her voice shrill with rage as she addressed the startled concierge. "Miles Vance, B Tower, apartment 1802. Get him down here, right now, or I swear I'll tear this place apart." Her appearance was so menacing that a security guard instinctively moved to intercept her. Chloe raised the stiletto, aiming the heel at him, her eyes feral. "Get back. Don't touch me. Get Miles Vance down here." The guard flinched and stepped back. The concierge, pale and flustered, fumbled for the intercom. Ethan rushed in just in time to see the scene unfolding. He stepped between Chloe and the guard, his voice low and firm. "Please contact Mr. Vance in 1802. Tell him Chloe and Ethan Hayes are here. It's urgent." His voice was steady, but his eyes were just as cold. The concierge tremblingly dialed the number and stammered a few words. Every second of waiting felt like an hour. Chloe paced like a caged animal, her bare feet cold on the marble floor, the stiletto swinging in her hand. A few minutes later, the elevator dinged. Miles stepped out. He was dressed in comfortable loungewear, his face a mask of annoyance and confusion. When he saw the murderous Chloe in the lobby, the stiletto in her hand, and the stone-faced Ethan beside her, his expression froze. A flicker of panic shot through his eyes. "Chloe? Ethan? What's all this?" he began, forcing his usual charming smile. He never finished the sentence. "Miles, you son of a bitch." All the pain, anger, and humiliation of the last 3 months exploded out of Chloe in a single, gut-wrenching scream. She launched herself at him like a crimson arrow, her bare feet pounding against the floor. The smile on Miles's face vanished, replaced by pure terror. He tried to back away to dodge. It was too late. Chloe reached him and, without a moment's hesitation, swung her leg up, channeling all her fury into a vicious kick aimed at the side of his knee. Crack! The impact, combined with the sickening sound of joint giving way, sent a bolt of agony through Miles's leg. He let out a pained cry and crumpled forward, his body collapsing like a felled tree. But she wasn't done. Before he could even hit the ground, Chloe was on him, raising the 4-inch stiletto high in the air. You want to drive a wedge between us? You want to fill my husband's head with lies? With a hysterical, tear-choked roar, the heel of the shoe came whistling down. Thud! The metal-tipped heel slammed into Miles's back. H-H-H! He screamed, his body curling in pain. But it was only the beginning. Chloe had lost it. Reason had been burned away by rage. She straddled him to keep him from getting away, her arm rising and falling, the stiletto becoming a primitive, brutal weapon. Again, and again, and again, she hammered it into his back, his shoulders, his arms. Thud! 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 The sickening dull impacts mixed with Miles's desperate screams for mercy echoed through the vast lobby. This one, she sobbed, bringing the heel down again, is for every lie my husband had to listen to. When did I ever say I married him out of necessity? Huh? Thud! The heel struck his shoulder blade. This one is for telling him I felt suffocated. You can take that bullshit and shove it. My husband is 1,000 times the man you'll ever be. Thud! And this one is for telling him I still loved a piece of trash like you. Her voice was shredded, but the hatred in it was boundless. I love him. Ethan, I only love him. Who the hell do you think you are? Thud! 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 Every blow was delivered with all her might. Every blow was a bloody, tearful reclamation of the truth. Miles's screams faded into weak, agonized moans. The concierge and security guard were frozen in a corner, their faces ashen with terror. And Ethan stood a few feet away, rooted to the spot. The cold fury on his face had been replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. He watched the woman on top of Miles, this wild, weeping, avenging fury, viciously defending him, defending their marriage, transforming into a demon to prove her innocence. Miles's recorded words, the evidence he had clung to, now seemed pathetic, laughable, and utterly insignificant in the face of this raw, violent truth. A powerful, overwhelming wave of emotion, regret, shock, and a profound, aching sorrow crashed over him. He opened his mouth, but his throat was tight, and no sound came out. He took a staggering step forward, not to stop her, but just to be closer. Chloe! He finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling. At the sound of his voice, her frenzied movement stopped. Her arm froze in midair, the blood-flecked stiletto glinting under the lights. She was panting, her chest heaving, as she slowly, stiffly, turned her head to look at him. Her face was a wreck of tears and sweat, her hair plastered to her skin. Her eyes were swollen and red, still burning with a dangerous light. But deep within them, as she looked at him, was a desperate, fragile plea for validation. Her lips trembled, and her voice, raw and broken, was thick with a grief that tore him apart. Ethan, did you hear me? None of what that bastard said was true. The only one I've ever loved is you. Do you believe me now? Chloe's ragged question, a desperate plea born from blood and tears, struck Ethan like a physical blow. He stared at her red, swollen eyes, at the tear-streaked face, and at the bloody stiletto still trembling in her hand. The lobby was dead silent, save for Miles's pathetic whimpering on the floor. Ethan's throat worked, but no sound came out. The ice, the anger, the suspicion that had encased his heart for 3 months. It all shattered into a million pieces under the force of her violent devotion. An immense, delayed wave of pain, regret, and a fierce, protective love washed over him. He lunged forward, not towards Miles, but towards her. I believe you, he choked out, his voice raw with a lifetime of emotion. He grabbed her wrist, the one still holding the shoe, his grip firm. Her skin was ice-cold and shaking. Chloe, I believe you. He yanked the dangerous weapon from her hand and threw it aside. It clattered loudly on the marble floor. You. Chloe seemed to still be in a daze, her body flinching at his touch. Her wild eyes were slowly refocusing. Don't hit him anymore. It's enough. Ethan's voice was harsh with lingering fear. He held her wrist tightly, as if afraid she would lunge again. His eyes scanned her frantically. Your feet. What about your feet? It was only then that Chloe seemed to feel the searing pain from the soles of her feet. She had run barefoot across pavement and fought on a hard, unforgiving floor. She looked down and saw that her feet were scraped raw, bleeding in several places, and her ankle was already starting to swell. Hiss! A sharp intake of breath escaped her lips as the pain finally registered. She swayed, nearly collapsing. "Don't move," Ethan barked. He half caught, half supported her trembling body. In one swift motion, he crouched, slid one arm under her knees and the other around her back, and lifted her into his arms. "Ah!" Chloe cried out in surprise as her feet left the ground, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck. Ethan held her, feeling how light and fragile she was in his arms. He looked down at her pale, tear-stained face and the way her brow furrowed in pain. His own heart clenched, aching with a love so fierce it hurt. "We're going to the hospital," he declared, turning and striding towards the exit, his voice leaving no room for argument. He didn't spare another glance for the whimpering heap that was Miles Vance. "Sir, miss, wait." The security guard finally snapped out of his shock, gesturing helplessly at the mess. "I'll take full responsibility. Tell him to call the cops. I'll be waiting." Ethan called back without breaking stride, his voice hard as iron. The only thing that mattered in the entire world was the broken, brave woman in his arms. He carried her out into the cold air. Chloe, wearing only thin loungewear, shivered. Ethan instinctively pulled her closer, shielding her with his own body as he flagged down a taxi. He carefully placed her in a back seat before sliding in beside her. "The nearest hospital. Fast," he ordered the driver. The car lurched forward. Inside, the only sound were their ragged breaths. Chloe huddled in the seat, wincing as fresh waves of pain shot up from her feet. She glanced at Ethan. His jaw was clenched, his profile rigid, but the way he had scooped her up without hesitation, the way his hands were now clenched into tight fists in his lap, it all radiated a protective fury that began to thaw the 3-month-old ice around her heart. The dam of her emotions finally broke. A fresh wave of tears, silent and heavy, began to fall, splashing onto his clenched fists. The warm drops made him flinch as if shocked. He slowly turned his head and saw her crying, her shoulders shaking silently. The sight broke him. His fists uncurled. Hesitantly, with a clumsy, rediscovered tenderness, he reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "Don't cry," he whispered, his voice thick and hoarse. "I'm so sorry." Those 3 words were heavy with a universe of regret. Chloe's crying hitched. She looked up at him, her eyes blurry. "You bastard," she choked out, her voice trembling. "You believed him, not me." "I'm the bastard," he admitted instantly, his gaze dropping to her injured feet, his heart twisting. "I'm an idiot. I was blinded by jealousy. I let him." He couldn't finish, just kept wiping her tears away as if that could undo his mistakes. "Everything he said, I never said any of it," she sobbed, explaining in broken sentences. He reached out after he got back. Old friends catching up. "I went. I admit it, because he helped me in college. I thought he was a friend. But every time, he just talked about how you weren't good enough for me, how we were a mistake. I argued with him every time. I told him I loved you. Then I started avoiding him. I had no idea he was twisting everything and feeding you lies." Her voice broke with fresh pain. "And you recorded it. You listened to it over and over. What did you think I was?" Her words were like daggers in his own heart. He remembered himself in the study, poisoning his own mind with those recordings, letting suspicion turn him into a cold monster who had almost destroyed them. "I'm sorry. Chloe, I'm so sorry." He couldn't hold back any longer. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. He buried his face in her hair, his voice choked. "I was wrong. I almost ruined everything." He held her as if he could fuse her to him, as if his warmth could mend the wounds he had inflicted. Tucked safely in his embrace, feeling the frantic, repentant beat of his heart, Chloe finally let go. The dam broke completely, and she wailed, crying out all the fear, pain, and despair of the last 3 months. "Ugh, Ethan, you idiot. You scared me so much. I thought you were really going to leave me." "Never. I will never leave you," he vowed, his arms tightening, his voice fierce with the terror of almost losing her. "I'm the idiot. I'm the one who almost lost you. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." That long unheard term of endearment made her cry even harder, but now, her tears were mixed with the catharsis of release, of being found again. The taxi driver glanced in the rearview mirror, sighed softly, and drove a little faster, a little smoother. Outside, the city blurred past. Inside, 2 broken souls clung to each other, their tears slowly, painstakingly beginning to glue back together the trust that had been shattered by lies. 7. The sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic filled the emergency room. Their tears slowly, painstakingly beginning to glue back together the trust that had been shattered by lies. 7. The sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic filled the emergency room. Chloe sat on an examination bed while a nurse gently cleaned her feet. Ow! Gently, that hurts! She winced, her eyes watering as the iodine swab touched an open scrape. She instinctively squeezed Ethan's hand. Ethan stood beside her, his brow furrowed in a deep, worried line. He watched the nurse tweeze out tiny bits of grit from her skin, his own heart aching with every flinch Chloe made. He held her hand tighter, stroking her back with his other. Just a little longer. It's almost over. The cuts are fairly deep, and she has a sprained ankle, the nurse said professionally. We'll bandage this up, keep it dry for a few days, and try to stay off it. Ice the ankle for the first 24 hours, then switch to heat. Okay, thank you. We will, Ethan said, nodding like a diligent student. Once her foot was wrapped in a thick, white bandage, Ethan carefully helped her down. They sat on a bench in the hallway, waiting for her prescription. The chaos of the ER faded into a dull roar around them. The storm had passed, leaving an exhausted but peaceful quiet in its wake. Chloe looked at her bandaged foot, then at the silent man beside her. The anger was gone, but the memory of the betrayal, the recordings, and the divorce papers still lingered like a bruise. Ethan stared at his own hands, as if he could still feel the warmth of her tears. The shame was suffocating. He took a deep breath. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and went to the secure folder. The list of dated audio files felt like a row of ugly scars, a monument to his own foolishness. Chloe's gaze followed, and her body tensed. Without looking at her, Ethan selected all the files. A prompt appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently delete the selected items? Without hesitation, he pressed confirm. The files vanished, leaving the folder empty. They're gone, Ethan said, his voice raspy. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a raw, honest regret. All of it. That stuff. It should never have existed. Chloe looked into his eyes and saw no trace of suspicion, only a profound apology. She sniffled and turned away, mumbling, deleting them doesn't change the fact that you heard them all. I know, he admitted, taking her hand. Those words, they poisoned me. They turned me into a monster who hurt you. Chloe, I know deleting the files doesn't erase the damage. The damage is here, he said, placing her hand over his heart. And it's here, he added, gently touching her bandaged foot. I owe you. He looked her in the eye, his voice sincere. Give me a chance, Chloe. Let me fix this. Let me spend the rest of our lives proving to you that I will never, ever make a mistake like this again. I will never let you feel that kind of pain again. His earnestness was overwhelming. The ice in her heart, which had been thawing since the fight, finally began to melt away. What about the divorce papers? She asked softly, her voice thick. Ethan blinked, then immediately reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded document. Without a second glance, he ripped it in half. RRRIP. The sound was loud and final in the quiet hallway. He folded the pieces and ripped them again and again until the agreement that had represented his despair was nothing but a pile of confetti in his hands. He walked to a nearby trash can and dumped the scraps inside. He returned to her side and took her hand again, his voice low and steady. Gone. It's all gone. There's only you and me. Our home. Chloe watched him, a small, watery smile touching her lips. The weight in her chest seemed to lift, disappearing with the shredded paper. She didn't speak, but squeezed his hand in response. He felt the pressure and let out a long, silent breath, the weight of 3 months finally lifting from his shoulders. He gently pulled her closer, letting her rest her head on his shoulder. She leaned into him, the familiar scent of his jacket, a mix of faint smoke and hospital antiseptic, a comforting anchor. The exhaustion finally hit her. Rest for a bit. We'll get the medicine and go home, he murmured into her hair. She hummed, closing her eyes. The physical and emotional wounds would take time to heal, but here, in his arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she felt a glimmer of hope. In the cold ashes, a stubborn flame was beginning to rekindle. 8 the following days moved in slow motion. Chloe's foot required rest, so Ethan took time off from work, appointing himself her full-time caregiver. He clumsily but earnestly learned to make soup, cooked porridge, diligently applied ice and heat packs to her ankle, and changed her bandages with a gentle touch that bordered on reverence. At first, Chloe felt awkward. The emotional wounds couldn't heal overnight. But watching Ethan burn the porridge, nearly slice his finger off while chopping vegetables, and break into a nervous sweat while dressing her wound, it slowly chipped away at her lingering resentment, replacing it with a tender, bittersweet warmth. "Ethan, is this soup supposed to be a salt lick?" she complained one afternoon, wrinkling her nose. He nearly dropped the ice pack on her ankle. I'll be more careful next time." A few days later, building management called. Miles had filed a police report and was demanding compensation for his medical bills, lost wages, emotional distress, and property damage. Chloe, listening from the bed, was instantly enraged. "Compensation? He can kiss my ass. Let him sue. I'll fight him to the bitter end." "You will stay right there," Ethan said, pressing her gently back onto the pillows. He spoke calmly into the phone. "We understand. We will verify the costs and cover what we are responsible for. However, this is conditional. Mr. Vance must provide a formal, written apology for his sustained campaign of slander and malicious interference in our marriage. That apology will be posted on the community notice board for 1 week. Otherwise, we will be pursuing our own legal action for defamation." There was a muffled discussion on the other end of the line. Finally, the manager replied, "Understood, Mr. Hayes. I will relay your terms." After he hung up, Chloe pouted. "Why should we pay that bastard anything?" Ethan sat beside her, gently massaging ointment onto her ankle. "It's better to resolve it with money and be done with it. Engaging with a person like him is a waste of our time and energy." He looked up, his gaze serious. "Besides, I don't want you to have to worry about this, and I certainly don't want you to ever see him again. Think of it as paying for peace and quiet." His thoughtfulness calmed her down. "Fine," she grumbled, "but that apology had better be posted. Everyone should know what kind of snake he is." "It will be," Ethan promised. A few days later, they got the news. Miles had agreed to the terms. Apparently, the story of the stiletto beatdown and the reasons behind it had already spread through their mutual circles, ruining his reputation. The company that had just hired him had politely asked him to resign, citing concerns about his character. He took the money, signed the apology, and moved out of the Cascade Grand in the middle of the night, reportedly leaving Seattle for good. "He's gone," Chloe said, surprised, then snorted. "Good. If I ever saw him again, I'd break my other heel on him." Ethan just shook his head, a fond smile playing on his lips. He held up a copy of the apology letter, in which Miles admitted to acting out of unrequited jealousy and fabricating malicious lies. "Should we post it?" Ethan asked. Chloe looked at the paper for a moment, then sighed. "You know what? Forget it. It's disgusting. Just shred it. Out of sight, out of mind." Ethan did as she asked. As the pieces fell into the trash, the last shadow of the ordeal finally lifted. The dust had settled,